Education and Outreach Supervisor here with Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Today, I am joined by Derek Yorks, one of our wildlife biologists who specializes in our reptiles, and he's going to share with us today some great information about his work and his work experience and about some of the different species here in Maine. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. But I am going to be turning it over now to Derek, who has joined us, and he's got a great presentation for all of us to enjoy. So welcome, Derek.
Hey, thank you, Laura. I'm just going to share my screen and then I'll get going. Hold on one moment. Okay, can you see that, Laura?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining this afternoon. Again, my name is Derek Yorks. I'm a wildlife biologist and I'm based out of Bangor. I work statewide, primarily with reptiles, but with some other wildlife as well. Today, I'm going to talk about my work with reptiles and some of the reptile species we have here in Maine. So, yeah, like I said, I'm going to cover my work program as a reptile biologist with IFMW, a little bit of how I became a reptile biologist, and I'm going to highlight some of the species and projects that I work on, and also touch on some of the ways that you can become involved in work with reptiles in Maine and contribute to what we do for these animals. So my role is as a species specialist focused on reptiles. And I did mention I work with some other species, a bit with amphibians and some invertebrate taxa such as beetles and snails. But most of what I do is reptiles. So here in Maine, that's turtles and snakes. And I work all around the state. Some of the kind of pillars of the work in my position is getting a better handle on the status and distribution of reptiles, particularly our rare reptile species and their populations all over the state. There's some research, it's mostly oriented around conservation and management of rare species. And I serve as a point of contact for expertise with reptiles, providing consultation and data to other state agencies, the public, academia, you name it. Really, if anyone kind of needs to know something about reptiles or particular places in reptiles, I'm usually the person that they'll intersect with eventually. And environmental review is another one of those kind of program elements. Inland Fisheries and Wildlife does a lot of permit consultation, mostly Department of Environmental Protection permits. And when projects intersect with known or suspected occurrences of rare turtles or snakes, we get involved to avoid and minimize impacts to these species when possible. So I became a reptile biologist, or I started to anyway, at a young age, like probably most other biologists, reptile or otherwise, that I know. So as a kid, I was out there catching turtles and snakes, convincing some of my friends that this was fun to do. Some of them liked it more than others. And luckily my parents were really supportive. I had grandparents that were really supportive too. It was a big part of growing up, being outside and just having this fascination carried me throughout my life to where I am today. So beyond kind of my early childhood and kind of self-introduction and introduction from peers and parents and grandparents, I became more formally engaged in working with reptiles. When I was in college, I did some work with spotted turtles on the lower left. And then later on, I went on after college, or I continued to work with snakes a little bit, tree boas like that pictured top center while an undergraduate, and then later worked in Massachusetts with wood turtles on a telemetry study, and out in California with some rattlesnakes and some other endangered and threatened snake species. And then back in Massachusetts, I did some work with federally threatened bog turtles, pictured here. These are the smallest turtles in North America, really neat, very rare turtles that inhabit fens. And did some other work in Massachusetts with eastern box turtles and spotted turtles. And later went to graduate school at the University of Massachusetts, where I focused on road mortality issues for turtles and engaged on a large experimental study looking at designs of fencing and under road passages for turtles. And this was in close collaboration with the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. So it's a pretty unique project, basically catching lots of turtles, mostly painted turtles, as you can see here, and sending them through these experimental tunnels of different sizes and different lighting levels, and seeing what turtles were willing to go through so that the design of road passages that go underneath roads could be better informed. And then I eventually wound up here in Maine working for Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, where I work with several turtle species and a couple different snakes. And there's more species I work with too, but the focus is mostly on state endangered, state threatened, and state special concern species. These are all species that are to varying degrees rare and under threat from a lot of different things. So we try to keep close tabs on them. We want to know where they are and how many there are. Even just doing that is, you could work your whole life just doing that, really. But that's kind of one aspect of what I do. So you can see a wood turtle there on the left, a spotted turtle in the center, and a black racer on the right. I'll get into a little more about all those species as we go. So here we have Maine's 7 native turtle species. Starting from the top left and going clockwise, we have a Blandings turtle. At the center, that's a wood turtle. Then we have a box turtle on the right, eastern box turtle. And then lower right, that's an eastern painted turtle. And then there's the snapping turtle. And then there's the common musk turtle. And last but not least, the spotted turtle. So of those species, I work primarily with Blandings turtles, spotted turtles, and wood turtles. These are all species that are fairly rare. Blandings being state endangered. They're found primarily in southernmost Maine, mostly in York County, in shrub swamps and marshes, shallow vegetated wetlands, vernal pools. Spotted turtles are found in really similar habitats in that really southern part of the state, but also coming up into the mid-coast and a little bit into central Maine. And then wood turtles, they're a stream and river species that favors sandy, gravel, substrate streams and rivers with lots of meandering channels and floodplain, brushy vegetation. And they also spend a lot of time in the uplands. But those river and stream habitats are their core habitats, and they're special concern. They're found statewide. So a lot of the work that I do with rare turtles is coordinated regionally. And what I mean by that is there are working groups that have been established for each of these species, where biologists such as myself in the northeastern states, and even in the case of something like the spotted turtle, all the way down the east coast of Florida, we all are in touch regularly. We have Zoom meetings monthly, and we're all working with these species, and we're all finding ways to make as much in common with the way that we collect data and study them, so that we can look at the trends for these species, for their populations and where they're found, range wide or at least across state lines, and be able to say, yeah, we collected data on Blanding's turtles the same way in Maine as you did in Massachusetts. So we can look at that data together, and we can compare things, and we can say a lot more, and we can learn a lot from each other. We're not all just in our silos completely doing things in different ways. There's a lot of communication, and there's a lot of power in being able to draw, I guess, more meaningful conclusions and come up with more universal solutions to conservation issues with these species by working across state lines. And it's also a really great way to collaborate. So, there are relatively few people doing anything working with turtles here in the state of Maine. So it's really nice to have the camaraderie across state lines and work and get to know a lot of the folks in other states that are working with some of these same species, and they're facing a lot of the same issues in terms of conserving these turtles too. So like I said, wood turtles, they're a stream and river species that like sandy, gravel, cobble substrate streams and rivers. I'll show some habitat coming up here. They're special concern, but looking more globally at their range in Eastern North America, US and Canada, they're considered endangered by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So in many states, their status is endangered or threatened. We have them statewide, and they're relatively secure in Maine compared to other states, which is why they're not listed as endangered or threatened. But they're still very vulnerable to habitat destruction and development and road mortality, and also illegal collection for the pet trade. Wood turtles are really distinct looking turtles. They have this orange coloration on their limbs and their neck that is kind of not completely covering their limbs and neck, but you can see it when you're looking at one like that one at the top. They're really beautiful turtle, almost look like a tortoise. They have kind of large feet and robust limbs with big scales on them. They're pretty all-terrain. These streams and rivers are their primary habitat, but they get all around in the forest. They're omnivorous. They eat lots of different plants, berries, snails, slugs, even carrion, dead things. And so we've had a project going with wood turtles for a number of years now, coordinating with this regional wood turtle working group to assess their populations and identify the best remaining wood turtle populations around the state. There's been a genetics component looking at genetic diversity within populations and between populations and between major watersheds, like comparing, say, the Penobscot watershed versus the Kennebec, and also a lot of technical assistance, mostly aimed at conserving the species. So working with other state agencies, federal agencies, landowners and land managers at ways to improve conservation for this species. Here's a wood turtle in some early spring habitat next to a nice stream. Here's what that same habitat might look like by June or so, when the vegetation's growing up and the black flies are out. They get a lot harder to find when things get green, but they really like these dense vegetated areas next to the stream habitat. And so Blanding's turtles are another species I work with quite a bit. They're restricted to southernmost Maine, and they're state endangered, so they're quite rare. We have relatively few populations of this turtle. Threats to the Blanding's turtle are similar for the wood turtle and a lot of others: habitat loss and habitat fragmentation, road mortality. These are turtles that have large home ranges. Their populations need large, intact blocks of habitat, which is typically a mix of diverse wetlands, marshes, shrub swamp, vernal pools, in a forested matrix. And so any fragmentation you have in that area with roads and development can cause problems and additive mortality, which can take a toll on their populations. They're very long-lived turtles, and under natural circumstances, most individual turtles have a really high rate of survival from year to year. So if you're even adding 1 or 2 extra deaths due to, say, roadkill at a population, which may only be 40 individuals, that annually is completely unsustainable, and the turtles simply won't be able to replace themselves. They'll gradually be wiped out from that site. So it's really important to understand where they're found so that we can work to conserve them. So like I said, they have large home ranges, on average about 330 acres, and use a lot of unique wetlands. They don't reach maturity to between ages 14 and 23, but they're known to continue to reproduce into their 80s. So these are really long-lived turtles. They probably live in excess of 100 years in the wild. Like I said, so far they're documented to still be laying eggs when they're 84 years old, I believe is the record. They're a really distinct, neat turtle. They have this big domed shell that kind of look like a World War II era army helmet, and they've got this bright yellow chin. They're just really cool. They have a long neck, so they're mostly, when you go to photograph them, they're kind of shy and they won't show you their whole neck. But if you catch one off guard, they have this great big long neck too, and that yellow chin and throat all the way down. So there's a similar effort with Blanding's turtles, with a working group working across state lines and trying to identify some of the best populations and gather a lot of data to understand how many there are. Do we see young turtles? Is there recruitment into the population? Are they successfully reproducing? Are there needs at sites? Do we need to deal with problematic roadways where they're being killed on the road? Do they have adequate nesting habitat? These are all things that we work on at a site-by-site level with these turtles, because they are so rare. So each population is quite important. One of the things we do is we do enhance and create nesting habitat sometimes for this species at sites where, say, the only nesting habitat might be the shoulder of someone's driveway or somebody's garden. So some sites that is the case, and what we'll do is we'll actually bring in some sand and create these mounds, and the turtles will find it. Usually we try to put it close to some existing nesting habitat. This is the site in southern Maine where we brought in this nesting habitat. We monitored it with time-lapse cameras. We continue to. After a couple seasons, we did have our first female Blanding's turtle show up and lay some eggs here. So it's a really neat and proactive thing we can do to provide some important habitat to this endangered turtle. Here's a turtle on the nest. That's actually a snapping turtle, but that's another created nesting site for Blanding's turtles. These sites get used by whatever turtle species are found at the site. Spotted turtles are another species. They're state threatened. We've been engaged in really similar work to what we've done for wood turtles and Blanding's turtles, so I won't get into all the nitty-gritty details. They're a much smaller turtle, but they have a similar ecology and similar habitat preferences to the Blanding's turtle. They like these shallow ephemeral wetlands, often marshes, shrub swamps, vernal pools. They're also threatened by habitat fragmentation, road mortality, illegal collection, and like the wood turtle, they're endangered throughout their range. So they're under the IUCN, they're listed as endangered. For spotted turtles, and Blanding's turtles both, we typically survey for them and assess their populations with trapping. You can see a trap there with a number of spotted turtles from a really very productive site. Traps are baited with sardines and placed out in wetlands. We return every 24 hours and check the traps, and all turtles we capture get a unique number notched into their shell. So they'll have that for life, and we can come back in 5 years and 10 years and see some of the same familiar turtles because they live a long time, and we can estimate their population, say this year, come back in 10 years and see if the population is the same, is it decreasing, is it increasing. All of that stuff that we can do by marking and recapturing turtles. And we engage in some conservation planning too, as we identify sites that have good populations of this and other species. We're able to work with landowners, land trusts. Sometimes it's wildlife management areas owned by Inland Fisheries and Wildlife that we're working on, but we work with whoever we can, whatever stakeholders are there, to ensure the long-term persistence and flourishing of their populations whenever we can. Road mortality is another thing I work on with turtles quite a bit. We've been engaged with Maine Audubon. That's had a citizen science project to identify areas, hotspots of road mortality, places where there's a disproportionate number of turtles crossing the road and often getting killed on the road. And as we identify those places, when they have a high amount of mortality, especially when it's an endangered or threatened or special concern species, or sometimes a combination of them, we do things like put up turtle crossing signs, which are open seasonally in the late spring through early summer, when turtles are most active and moving across the landscape and most likely to be crossing roads, particularly females out nesting. They're at higher risk, like this female spotted turtle here about to cross a road. In some places, turtle passages are something that we can put up. This one's under a private drive, but we do have one that's just getting completed down in Elliott on Route 236. So if you live down that way, you may have seen some construction. There was a road closure last 2 weekends ago, I believe, when they first started putting things in. But there's fencing to funnel the turtles towards a crossing structure, and then a crossing structure under the road that we're pretty confident the turtles will use. And that site in Elliott, we've been working really closely with the Maine DOT and also the Maine Turnpike Authority to find funding and get something designed and built and put on the ground. It's taken years. So there's not a lot of these structures out there right now, but when we identify places that they could really benefit, especially state endangered turtles like the Blanding's turtle, or state threatened like a spotted turtle, this is something that one of the tools that we have available to try and get out there. The black racer is the primary snake that I work with. There are only state listed snakes, so they're state endangered. We do have a couple special concern snake species, the brown snake and the ribbon snake. I won't get into them too much. I'm going to focus a little bit on racers because we have a pretty active program. For the past 5 years, we've been studying black racer populations, mostly, or they're almost entirely in York County, kind of centered around the Sanford area and some of the surrounding towns. It's Maine's largest snake species, and they're a bit of a habitat specialist. They like dry upland habitats, including barrens, dry woodlands, power line corridors, and a number of other habitats. But it's a species that is suffered due to habitat loss and habitat conversion, even succession, as old abandoned agricultural lands have gradually matured into forest. Sometimes the forest habitat that they mature back into is unsuitable for racers, and other times habitat matures to forest and then is developed. And they have a relatively small range in the state, so kind of each site where they occur, similar to the Blanding's turtle, each population, each site where they occur, really kind of, it's more than a drop in the bucket. If you picture, maybe you have a bucket and there's only 10 or 20 drops in it, so each drop really matters. Like I said, for the past 5 years, we've been working pretty intensively with racers, trying to identify sites where they occur currently, and kind of confirm those, revisit old sites that we've known about, and develop and implement a population monitoring program so that we can really kind of take the pulse of how they're doing. We can go in and see if there's a healthy racer population, or if they're barely hanging on. It's a species that seems to respond quite a bit to changes in habitat on the landscape. So things like fire, where there's prescribed fire, or timber harvests, where if you're removing a lot of the tree canopy, they actually really benefit from that, and they like those recently harvested woodlands. But it's a species that they're really finite in terms of the number of snakes and where they're found. So we want to know as much as we can about where they are and kind of what the ingredients are in terms of habitat that lends to healthy populations. So we've been, in addition to the population monitoring, where we're marking and recapturing racers at some of our best known sites, we've been doing radio tracking, so using small radio transmitters that are implanted in adult racers by a veterinarian. And then we go out there a couple times a week and locate the snakes so that we can determine what habitats they're using and which habitats are most critical in the spring, in the summer, in the fall. Where are they nesting? Where are they overwintering? All of these things, so we can better understand at the site level, specifically what particular areas of a site are important to the population, and then more broadly here in Maine, at the edge of the range for the species, what are the kind of characteristics that all these sites that have this species, what do they have in common? So it's been a really, really interesting project. We've tracked around 30 racers to date over the last 5 years. We just captured 2 more at a site this past week, and we're planning to try and capture some more tomorrow. And we're aiming to have around a dozen with radios out this year. So a little bit of some scenes from the racer surveying and racer study. You can see some different types of racer habitat, and right there in the center, my own hand with a racer and some colleagues on an exceptional day near a large hibernacula, which supports a lot of racers, more so than we found anywhere else in the whole 5 years. So you can see these are large snakes, and they really like these sunny, brushy habitats, places with a lot of low bush blueberries and sheep laurel and huckleberry, and kind of dry season grasses, but also regenerating forest, sandy, gravelly soils, most typically, sometimes pitch pine, scrub oak habitat as well. And mostly this, you do have kind of areas around the state that have these types of habitats and these sandy, gravelly soils, but it's a species that I mentioned is on the edge of its range, the northern edge of its range. It really doesn't extend just barely north of York County. We do have them a little bit up to Oxford County near the Saco River. So here you can see a racer. This is a younger adult racer. Each individual snake gets marked in a couple different ways. One of the ways here, these scissors are actually to cut small clips into the ventral scales on the snake, and each little small cut results in a small scar on the scale, and each of those corresponds to a number. So we can mark individuals, and they also get implanted with pit tags, which is a small non-powered microchip that we can scan out there in the field, which is useful because the scale clip works for about a year, but every time the snake sheds its skin, it heals a little bit, and the scar will go away. So we collect a lot of data on each snake we capture. We measure them, we weigh them. Like I said, we mark them, and then the select number of snakes go back to a veterinarian and get implanted with radio transmitters. And those allow us to track the snake for about a year. Here we have our veterinarian conducting a surgery. The snake is anesthetized, and for a brief period, it's a small incision. You can see he's tying some sutures right there. we hold the snake for at least 24 hours after surgery to ensure everything's gone well, and then we release the snake right back where we caught it. And snakes pretty much get right back to business, and usually they're ready to go really within hours of the surgery, but we do keep them a bit longer. And then, like I said, we locate them using a radio receiver. We can get signals on the snake up to about a quarter of a mile away. We have some large movements. Some snakes will go almost a couple miles from capture locations sometimes. So occasionally we'll have a snake that we chase for hours on end, but we do find almost all of them, or really all of them eventually. And it's a great way to learn about habitat selection, which is the primary reason we're doing it, and also identify important areas for nesting and overwintering. And so, yeah, this study's ongoing. Currently this year, we're assessing, most of our work is assessing habitat use at a site which underwent some development for a large solar array installation. So there was some habitat loss from the solar. There's a large racer population. We have some data we collected using radios prior to the construction, and now we're going in to see, now that this solar array is built, how are the snakes responding to it? So it will be interesting. So ways that you can get involved and you can contribute to reptile conservation here in Maine. There's some citizen science, community science projects out there. MARAP stands for the Maine Amphibian and Reptile Atlasing Project. It's actually the longest running citizen science project in the state, as far as we know. So since the mid-1980s, we've been collecting data on the township level. So looking at all reptile and amphibian occurrences, all species for each town across the whole state. And there's been 2 books published from this data, and a third edition is going to be coming out in a couple years. So currently we have over 14,000 records in this database. Anyone can contribute data. There's a fillable PDF form that's available on IFNW's website that you could download to submit data. If you see a garter snake in your backyard, or you see a wood turtle crossing the road up north, all those observations, a common species or rare species, it's all valuable to us. We want to know all the species for every single township, from Portland to T3 R4. So another way to do that is with iNaturalist, and that's probably the easiest way. It's the way I primarily do it myself. Any reptile or amphibian you document in the state of Maine using the iNaturalist app will automatically get added to our MARAP project, and then we can download that data and incorporate it into the database. So other things you can do to help are considering reptiles and amphibians when you're managing your own land, and whether you have a small postage stamp of a backyard or you have 500 acres surrounding your house, you can do something. These are small animals, and sometimes their populations can exist in just a small patch of land, but there's a lot of things you can do in terms of creating a diversity of habitats on your land. Like I said, racers are a species that, for instance, likes early successional scrubby habitat. So they benefit from things like frequent timber harvests where they're found. There are other species that want a closed canopy, cool, moist forest, like a lot of our salamander species. So it's often the most diverse sites with the most diverse set of habitats that have the greatest diversity of reptile and amphibian species. And there's resources out there on the web that provide some good information on specific things you can also do to manage your land for reptiles and amphibians. And feel free to reach out to me. I can direct you towards some of those. So other things you can do is supporting your local and statewide land trust and nature centers. These are amazing resources. I work regularly with nature centers and land trusts all over Maine, and many of them are really interested in doing the right thing for Maine's reptiles and amphibians. I'm always happy to help them, to let them know, hey, you might have spotted turtles on this preserve that that you have, and that kind of thing. So they do great work, and nature centers play a huge role in educating the public about some of these species that might be less known and less iconic than, say, the moose and the black bear and white-tailed deer. So another thing that you can do to support this work is supporting Inland Fisheries and Wildlife's non-game and endangered species fund. The primary way that the public does that is through purchase of the loon license plate. So you've all seen them out there. There's a lot of different vanity plates, and there's some others that are wildlife or outdoors oriented, but this is the only one that, or a really significant portion of the sale of each, or the fee for each plate, goes directly towards the non-game and endangered species fund, which supports a good majority of the work that I've been presenting on here today. It's a really important non-federal funding source for us too, to utilize federal funds on some of these big regional projects. So it's every little bit that goes towards that matters. And another way to contribute towards that is at tax time, there's the chickadee checkoff where you can contribute tax dollars to go towards this work. So for folks out there that might want to be a wildlife biologist or herpetologist, or just want to help out in this area, there's a lot of things you can do. I came up with this list thinking about things that mattered to me personally in my own experience mostly. Mentorship is really big. Like if you know a young person or even a not so young person that really has an interest in you can teach them something, or you can help them connect to others. It's always worth doing. I was lucky, like I said, to have parents that were really supportive of little Derek out there flipping logs over and catching salamanders. And I had a grandfather who was very much interested in nature, plants and animals, and fishing, and knew a thing or two about turtles and snakes. And I spent a lot of time with him, and that was a big part of my early time too. And then just having a lot of time in nature. As a kid, I was outside in the woods all the time. I was out fishing. I was out looking for snakes and turtles. So just that kind of relatively untethered free time in nature, just kind of developing my understanding and getting a real visceral experience was important. And reading a lot of books. I always was picking up books on different things. There's a lot that can happen from buying a kid a field guide if they seem like they might be interested in reptiles at a young age. I know I cherished all of mine. I still have them all too. And then connecting with like-minded folks. There's a lot of ways to do that. And then you can look for ways to get involved that are in work that's exciting to you. So I mentioned Maine Audubon's road mortality study for turtles. That's one that's I think it's still going a little bit. Last couple of years it was more active, but the iNaturalist program, there's a lot of citizen science projects out there right now. But Inland Fisheries and Wildlife has a great citizen science portal, and you can find a lot of resources on there. So I'd encourage anyone to check that out. And also local nature centers and land trusts are good resources for those kinds of things too. And if you really want to get your feet wet or your whole body wet, you can work on a wildlife study. Often if you're able to be a committed volunteer for half a day a week or something, someone would probably be grateful to have your help. I know some of my first real serious engagement was as an undergrad working on other people's studies, and kind of after my undergrad before I did my own graduate study work. But it was really, really eye-opening, really kind of immersive and really neat. So, yep, and those are my own kids there on the right. Sometimes I take them out to see turtles, which is always fun, even if there's ticks and mosquitoes. I think they like turtles still, so trying not to ruin that. So yeah, I'd say just I'll probably wrap up my my talking here and hopefully have time for some questions. These are just a few shots from mostly land trust outings, which I sometimes get involved in, where members from the land trust want to go out and kind of see some of the species that are on land trust preserves, and they get me involved because they're reptiles and amphibians. It's always fun. You get families, you get older folks. Here's everyone sinking on a boardwalk that's out on a bog, but no one seemed to mind too much. Yeah, and I guess with that, I'll just we can open things up to any questions that may have popped up or that anyone thinks of now. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Derek. That was really, really fascinating. A lot of great information. And I did, while you were talking, pop some of those links into the chat so people can find them later. But you can also go to mefishwildlife.com and find a lot of the things that Derek was talking about under our fish and wildlife menu options. So if you didn't copy those links down and you're not sure, just go to mefishwildlife.com. But we did have some questions come in, and again, if you have questions, go ahead and write them in the chat, and we will get to as many of them as we can today. So first off, you had been talking about some of the things you did with nesting turtles to kind of help them out, especially when they kind of come along people's driveways and creating some of those artificial nesting areas. And someone was wondering, do you ever cover those nests to help protect them from scavengers at these artificial sites that that you're monitoring?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. So we haven't done very much of that here in Maine so far. So that's a really common approach, especially where you have a lot of predation. So yeah, we haven't done a lot of that, but it is a tool that people use. And kind of one of the thoughts with creating all these nesting areas or enhancing nesting areas is after we create them, we're monitoring them mostly with time-lapse cameras because we can't be everywhere at once. The cameras can be there all the time, taking one photo every 5 seconds or whatever we want to do. And is if we do see a lot of predation at a particular site, we should know about it because we're seeing the dug up nests, we're maybe seeing raccoons and things on cameras, and then we can go in there and cage nests. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things where by having these managed nesting habitats, it's one of the options on the table should we need to do it. But it's not something we've used a lot so far. But I'd say in a lot of other places, it's a really critical tool for reducing predation and boosting population. It's not something we've ruled out, it just kind of hasn't happened yet.
Great, thank you. And along those lines, somebody was wondering, is anybody breeding any endangered turtles or other reptiles, or kind of head starting any of them for release?
Yep. Yeah, good question. So in Maine, not currently, but in some other states, it's definitely, again, it's a tool that's used a lot. In Massachusetts, they have a couple of long-term head starting programs. So head starting is when you usually either you collect the eggs right after the female has laid them at a natural site, incubate them in captivity, and raise those hatchlings for usually about a year till they get beyond the size where most things are going to prey upon them, and then release them. So they're kind of head started, or sometimes just the nest caging. So they'll cage the nest in the field, and when the hatchlings come out, then they'll bring them in and raise them. So Massachusetts has a long-term program for 2 species, Blanding's turtles, mostly at one particular site that's the National Wildlife Refuge. I think it's something like 25, maybe 30 years they've been protecting nests and sometimes head starting. And then for the Plymouth red belly turtle, which is a federally threatened turtle just found in Plymouth County, eastern Massachusetts, there's been a long-term head starting program for that species. And both of those have been really successful. So they're it's a really hands-on approach that requires quite a bit of resources in terms of people in space dedicated to rearing a lot of small turtles. But when when the need is really there, it's a tool that can be really effective, and it's usually done in tandem with trying to address what was the reason this population was diminished so much that we needed to step in and aggressively conserve the species in the first place. So was there a road? Was there an elevated population of raccoons and other human subsidized predators? So kind of dealing with the treating the cause of the problem in addition to the symptoms, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like quite a bit of all of this. It was really wonderful to hear all this information that you have. You have a few more questions. A lot of questions about nesting. I guess that's appropriate with the season we're coming into. Do turtles always nest in sandy soils?
Yep. So good question. So not always. So I'd say like in general, that's like kind of on average, that's the preferred substrate. So kind of open or unvegetated sandy soils or sparsely vegetated. But it's partly because sandy soils are slower to vegetate than non-sandy soils. So sand drains so well. There's fewer plants that can really colonize it and take over and grow really well. So a lot of times sandy places end up with just sparse vegetation or take a long time to revegetate until you get some organic matter building up, leaves blowing in, small patches of plants decaying. So the turtles need to have like something easy to dig in and fairly well drained. But you'll see turtles nesting in recently plowed agricultural fields, gardens. A lot of times turtles will nest in say if someone builds a house or landscapes their yard and you have a newly seeded area in the grass that's just barely coming in, and it's June when the turtles nest, you'll get turtles nesting there. And then so on a species level too, there's a lot of difference between species. So a snapping turtle is probably the most versatile in terms of like what they'll nest on. So they'll nest in kind of like any type of soil as long as it's exposed a little bit and not totally vegetated, whether it's sand or just rich loam or gravel, really anything. And then you have some that are pickier, like I guess wood turtles might be a little bit. They really like sand, but they'll use some other things too. But then you'll have species like the spotted turtle will often nest. They'll nest in sand and gravel and different kinds of soil, but they also frequently nest in sphagnum moss right out in the wetland where you have acidic wetlands with a lot of boggy vegetation, including big kind of hummocks, mounds of sphagnum. They'll nest right in the top of that moss and may not even leave the wetland to lay their eggs because they like moss.
That is quite a diverse different types of nesting sites. And when you mentioned the garden, I've actually gotten that question quite often when talking about turtles with the public. They want to know if a turtle is nesting in their garden or in their yard. Is there anything they can do, or is it best to just leave them there?
Yeah. Yep. No, I get that. We get that every year during June when the turtles nest. So things you can do are, if you can leave the eggs there, it's a pretty small area. It's probably a 1 square foot, if you know right where they nested, that you can just leave undisturbed, and that would be good. If they're, say, right in the middle of like a driveway, like right where the wheels of cars will be going, in that case, it might be if you can't drive around it, it might be advisable to relocate the nest. So it's fairly tricky to relocate a turtle nest because female turtles are really selective about picking just the perfect place with the perfect conditions. And you kind of have to do the same thing. And also it's further complicated by the fact that after the eggs have been laid, I think it's about maybe 20 with it. If you don't move the nest within 12 to 24 hours after they've been laid, you have to mark the top of each individual egg if you're going to move it, because if you rotate the egg, you'll actually kill the embryo, because the embryo is attached to a certain part of the egg, and you can effectively like deprive the embryo of oxygen by rotating the egg. So standard practice for moving turtle nests is very carefully excavating the eggs and trying not to break them, and then putting a little pencil mark on the top of each egg as you move them, so that you know what is the top. And then you put them back in the ground right at the exact same depth in the same kind of condition. So you can do it, but I'd say it's kind of a last resort.
Right. It's always good to leave it how mom left it. That definitely makes sense. Mom knows best.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, so we're coming into what a lot of people think of as like turtle season, and they're starting to be more active. And as the weather warms, the turtles notice this and they're starting to move. And I'm sure plenty of people will be seeing turtles in the road, snapping turtles, painted turtles. What would you say is the best way to help a turtle that you see in the road if you're somebody?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Right now we're just getting into kind of turtle in the road season, and it goes well through June and into July a little bit typically. That's the busy time anyway. So if you see a turtle in the road, it's definitely fine to help that turtle and move it out of the road. The first thing you want to consider is just your own safety. So always make sure that if you're going out to help a turtle in the road, that people or any other motorists are going to be able to see you, and that it's not like a dangerous situation. Sometimes if you're with someone else and there's not a lot of traffic, you can often have someone kind of spot for other vehicles while you help the turtle, and ask people to stop or slow down. I've definitely done it plenty of times like that, and it helps. And you want to move turtles in the direction that they're headed. So if it's clear that the turtle was going, from left or right in front of you, keep moving it to the right, where it was headed. Because if you bring it the other way, even if you think, oh, there's a nice pond on the other side and it's just going into the woods, the turtle is definitely going somewhere. And if you put it back to the pond, as soon as you leave, it's going to be like, hey, I was going somewhere. I was going to go lay my egg on the other side of that forest. So the turtle will just go right back into the road. If you can't tell which direction the turtle was headed, which does happen sometimes, in that case, I'd say put the turtle whatever side of the road looks more suitable. So if one side has like a marsh and the other side is just a forest and you can't tell, put it on the marsh side. It's really a flip of the coin, to be honest, at that point. But having the turtle not in the road is certainly better than just leaving it there. And with snapping turtles are kind of the one species that's tricky to actually move, because they bite and they're heavy, and so there's a few different ways you can handle them. But basically, if you remember that kind of the whole front 180 degrees of their shell is within range of their long neck and their head, you really need to avoid that. You never want to pick them up by their tail, because you can injure their spine pretty easily doing that. What you can do is you can pick them up just above each hind leg with two hands. If you have a firm grip and you want to hold them away from your body, because like I said, they have that long neck, they can reach quickly. And I guess the first option might be to just like give the turtle some space to move on their own. But if you need to move it, picking up by the top of the shell, the carapace just above each hind leg on either side of the tail, and holding the turtle away from your body. That's the best way to do it. Sometimes you might have like a snow shovel or something, and you could kind of scoop the turtle, but usually it's just hands. So be really careful and stay away from that whole front half of the body.
Yes, we don't want anyone getting bitten by snapping turtles. And I've heard it's not good to drag them, right? I know some people say like just let the snapper bite something and drag it, but I've heard that that's not really a good method because of their size of their shell underneath. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Particularly on like a paved road, it's pretty rough on the turtle. I'd say like, you for a large snapping turtle, if you aren't comfortable with lifting it the way I described, holding above each hind leg, on a gravel road, you could gently drag the turtle, holding it in that same position, and the turtle would be okay. They would have their front claws down, and it really wouldn't hurt them on gravel. But I would avoid doing that on pavement, because they do have quite a bit of skin down on the bottom half of them that would be exposed, and they'd probably end up getting scraped.
No, that's all really good advice. And if you do come across an injured turtle, we of course recommend looking up your local wildlife rehabilitator. There are a few in the state that do deal with turtles. So there's just there's a couple questions left, and we thank everybody for your participation, and thank you, Derek. But we'll just do two more questions. Our first question was, so you had mentioned iNaturalist and some ways that people can get involved and kind of submit their observations of different species that they see. But somebody in particular was wondering if there will be any volunteer opportunities in York County this summer that you are aware of or you might be involved in.
I'll have to think. Offhand, I don't know of anything. But if whoever has that question, feel free to. My email is listed on the slide here. If you can still see it, feel free to send me an email, and I'll keep mulling it over, and if I think of something, I'll definitely point you in that direction.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of great things, and we definitely recommend trying iNaturalist to submit your reptile and amphibian observations. It's really fun, and always feel free to reach out. And lastly, it has been noticed that you are very knowledgeable and seem very passionate about this topic. Have you always wanted to be a herpetologist?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I guess my thought was, especially like getting in college and things, when I was like, oh, what do I want to get a degree in? Kind of, it was always something that I thought like, no matter what I end up doing for a living, I'm always going to really care about this a lot. And so that was part of my logic, at least for me, in terms of continuing to pursue it, because I knew I wouldn't ever be tired of it. So I think, yeah, to a degree, I probably always, not the only thing I ever wanted to be, but it was kind of always there, and it's I don't regret it. I still like what I do.
No, that's great, and we're very fortunate to have you here on our wildlife biology team. So again, thank you very much, Derek. This has been a really wonderful presentation, lots of great information. So really appreciate you joining us and taking time out of your day. I'm sure this time of year is quite busy for you. So thank you.
It is. So I'm happy to do it, though. It was fun, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Yes, thank you everybody for tuning in and joining us. Be sure to check back for some more great upcoming live presentations. We have another one this Friday at 10:30 live from the Maine Wildlife Park. So we'll hope you'll join us then. And please check out some of the other videos that we have here on our Fish Wildlife YouTube page.